So nice that you could join us again this evening for another episode of A Gray Barn Rising. I say us because, of course, I'm sitting here with my hound dog, Bootsy Beagle, and she's taking a little nap. She's with me here every night when I read poetry, whether I film or not. And I'm really excited to share the poetry with you tonight of a marvelous poet who really is not as well known as he should be. And it's a poet by the name of Jack Spicer. Jack Spicer was a member of the Berkeley Renaissance in the Bay Area in the 50s and early 60s. He was a linguist by training, a very educated and erudite man who wrote really incredible poetry that was far ahead of its time. It was actually anticipating poetry that's a little more meta-discursive, or poetry that's language about language, language and how language itself operates. One of the things I think that fed that for him was that he was a linguist by training, beyond being a poet. Jack Spicer was born in 1925. He left the body in 1965. He lived hard. He drank a lot. And as he was in his hospital bed dying, he is reportedly to have spoken, his last words reportedly were these: "My vocabulary did this to me." And the reference, I think, is to him feeling a little overwhelmed at times by what he knew about language and how it operated. But those are the last words that he is said to have spoken. He spoke them to his friend Robin Blazer. And I'm going to be reading from the collected poetry of Jack Spicer, which is also titled "My Vocabulary Did This to Me." So I want to begin this evening with the first poem in a series of letters he wrote to James Alexander in 1958 and 1959. James Alexander was actually from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And as James Alexander traveled back to Fort Wayne, Indiana, Jack wrote him some letters. Jack Spicer was madly in love with James Alexander. And although he had never been to Fort Wayne, Indiana, he imagined what it was like. Although Jack Spicer had never been to Fort Wayne, Indiana, he imagined what it was like. And so this first poem invokes Fort Wayne and talks about it. I thought it'd be interesting to share it with you this evening. Fort Wayne, Indiana is the capital of nitrogen. All streets end there. No buses arrive there except those that carry direct mail or cargoes of Negroes en route on the Underground Railway. There has never been a city made up of so many arms. You can see Troy, New York in the distance. Christmas poems and lovers' holly branches grow there in the winter, as well as stuffings of turkeys, memory pie, and little droppings of passing angels. It is not reached by air. Fort Wayne, Indiana has industries and tournament golf and blocks of weeping buildings. It is built on high ground above the slough of utter unwinding. The birds, which all look like seagulls or cormorants in its artificial sky, finish singing when the day is over. At night, they look like elephants. People watch them with telescopes as they hover. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, the trees are dying, and you can see footprints in the rather wet snow. People take their motor scooters to bed with them. Come back to California. Come back to California. Every map maker is pleading to James Alexander. What do the sparrows eat in the winter? I asked someone once in Minneapolis. He replied, they eat horse turds if they can find them. There are acres of cold snow. It's a wild poem. I love his use of common words, common phrasings. One of the other things that I adore about Jack Spicer is he is not afraid to repeat something. As you heard in that mapmaker line, come back to California, come back to California. Every mapmaker is pleading to James Alexander. I love that he will repeat a phrase or a line in a poem like that. It's very, very beautiful. I want to read next a poem from his great book, Language. I mentioned that he was a linguist, and this is a book that really deals with language. Again, I want to read from an early edition. Short little poem, very intense poem that's untitled. Goes this way. Smoke signals, like in the Eskimo villages on the coast where the earthquake hit. Bang, snap, crack. They will never know what hit them on the coast of Alaska. They expect everybody to be insane. This is a poem about the death of John F. Kennedy. Very startling ending. A line that, if you go back through the poem, you see it really is part of the poem. It's not just a diversion. But I still remember the very first time I read this poem, and I went, what? Holy smokes, you know, I looked at that last line, then I went back and thought, oh yeah, the poem really does prepare you for that, although I was not prepared for it at the time. And going back to my vocabulary did this to me. I'd like to read a poem with the first line, we find the body difficult to speak. I want to dedicate this poem tonight, of course, to the technical advisor and assistant that has been helping me all these first few months in the Poet Laureate position, and that's Ben Larson. This is one of Ben's very favorite, if not favorite, Jack Spicer poems, and he even had it memorized at one point. I believe he still does. And so, Ben, this is for you and for your love of Jack Spicer as well. We find the body difficult to speak. We find the body difficult to speak, the face too hard to hear through. We find that eyes in kissing stammer, and that heaving groins babble like idiots. Sex is an ache of mouth, the squeak our bodies make when they rub mouths against each other, trying to talk. Like silent little children, we embrace, aching together. And love is emptiness of ear. As cure, we put a face against our ear and listen to it as we would a shell, soothed by its roar. We find the body difficult and speak across its wall like strangers. Such a beautiful, moving poem. He is an emotional poet who's not afraid to express those deep wells of emotion, and yet he balances those out with his intellect and his love of language. I just so admire Jack Spicer. I want to close this evening's installment of this show for you with one of my favorite Jack Spicer poems entitled For Mac. One of the things about this poem is that the discourse shifts at times, that there are these very interesting sentence fragments, or even in the middle of the sentence there will be a beginning of a sentence and then the last half of the sentence doesn't quite match up with the beginning of the sentence. And I just love how the language keeps the reader or the listener slightly unbalanced, slightly off kilter, which is one of the things that I think makes Jack Spicer's poetry alive and still so relevant to us today. For Mac. A dead starfish on a beach. He has 5 branches representing the 5 senses, representing the jokes we did not tell each other. Call the earth flat. Call other people human. But let this creature lie flat upon our senses like a love prefigured in the sea that died, and went to water all the oceans of emotion. All the oceans of emotion are full of such fish. Why is this dead one of such importance? Dyed with blue of heart's blood, the brown of unknowing, the purple of unimportance. It lies upon our beach to be crowned. Purple starfish are, and love is like nothing I can imagine. Those were the poems of Jack Spicer. I read primarily from my vocabulary, Did This to Me. The poem I read from language, just because I love to read in early editions if I can, to have the feel and the texture and the tactile experience of the original book. But the poem I read from this book is gathered in the collected as well. This would be a book that's available, and I would encourage you to get. And Jack Spicer's work is huge. You can even see the size of this book. It's huge, and it has many facets, and I invite you to explore those facets. And thanks so much for joining us.